I just played every Rockstar game, and I'm going to be ranking every single playable character. So let's find out just how much Rockstar's protagonists have changed, and of course, spoilers ahead.
Mission complete!
Grand Theft Auto 1. This was the blueprint for everything GTA would become. But let's be real, playing this today, it's rough. The controls are stiff, the graphics are basic, and you'll probably crash more times than you can count. But back then, this was revolutionary. What's wild is Rockstar wasn't even Rockstar yet. Back then, they were DMA Design, a small Scottish studio best known for Lemmings. They had no idea they were about to create one of the biggest franchises in gaming history. GTA 1 technically had multiple playable characters, but let's be real, none of them had real depth. Travis, Troy, Kivlov, and the rest, they were just names on a screen. No voice acting, no personality, just blank slates for players to project onto. So, in terms of character development, there's really nothing to rank. Compared to the legends that would come later, this one's getting an easy F tier. 2 years after the original, Grand Theft Auto 2 hit the scene in 1999, bringing back the top-down perspective but with a little more polish. The graphics got a slight upgrade, the world felt a little more alive, and this time, there was an actual structure to the madness. Instead of just causing random destruction, you had to work with different gangs, earning respect from one while making enemies with another. It was still rough around the edges, but compared to the first game, it felt like a real step forward. Unlike the blank slates from GTA 1, the main character Claude Speed actually had something resembling a personality. He starred in a live-action promotional short film where he stole cars, gunned down enemies, and ran from the cops. But in the game itself, he was still just a silent, faceless criminal doing jobs for money. So while GTA 2 made some improvements, Claude Speed was still miles away from the iconic protagonists we'd see later. E tier. In 2001, Grand Theft Auto 3 really did change gaming forever. Gone were the top-down, pixelated cities. This was a fully 3D open world where you could do whatever you wanted. This was the first time it really felt like a real place. Pedestrians had conversations, cars followed traffic laws, and for the first time, GTA had a cinematic story. And then there's the protagonist, Claude. Yep, just Claude. He doesn't speak. He doesn't react. He's just there. As for the gameplay, it was rough around the edges, but groundbreaking. Driving felt solid, gunplay was clunky but functional, and the city was full of hidden details, day-night cycles, different gang territories, and a police system that actually made you think before causing chaos. Claude still might be one of the most forgettable protagonists in the GTA universe, but that isn't to say the game's not legendary. C tier. Okay, so now we're getting to characters who can actually speak. Set in the vibrant, neon-lit Vice City, the game follows Tommy Vercetti, a former hitman for the Forelli crime family. Fresh out of a 15-year prison stint, Tommy is sent down south to oversee a drug deal for his old boss, Sonny Forelli. The deal is ambushed, the money and drugs are gone, and Sonny is furious. Now, Tommy has two choices: recover what was lost or end up back in a body bag. Voiced by Ray Liotta, he's sharp, ambitious, and ruthless. Unlike some GTA protagonists who are forced into crime, Tommy actively embraces it. He's not just a thug, he's a strategist. He starts off as a guy trying to clean up a mess, but ends up turning Vice City into his personal empire. Tommy's arc is one of the strongest from Rockstar. He starts out as a guy trying to clean up a bad situation, but quickly realizes he doesn't have to answer to anyone. Unlike other GTA protagonists who take orders from bigger crime bosses, Tommy flips the script. He becomes the boss. By the end, he's not just surviving in Vice City, he owns it. As much as Tommy is an awesome character, the writing team definitely left some areas underdeveloped. For starters, he never really changes. Sure, he gains more power, but his personality stays exactly the same from start to finish. Compare that to someone like Michael from GTA 5, who wrestles with his choices, or Nico Bellic from GTA 4, who is constantly haunted by his past. Tommy, on the other hand, is just a hot-headed gangster the whole way through. And then there's his backstory, or rather, the lack of it. We know Tommy went to prison for 15 years after a hit went wrong, but that's pretty much all we get. How did that affect him? How did it shape his worldview? We never really find out, because the game never explores it. A few moments of introspection, or even some side characters bringing up his past, could have added so much depth to his character. But in a city where everyone's out to get ahead, Tommy plays the game better than anyone. Sure, the shooting mechanics were clunky, and the AI wasn't the smartest, but that didn't matter. The world, the story, and the characters made up for it. And at the center of it all was Tommy Vercetti, A tier. You never actually see the main character in any of these three games, F tier. Released in 2003, this game wasn't about fun, fast cars, or building a criminal empire. You're not a gangster, you're not a mastermind, you're just a man trying to survive, and it's brutal. You play as James Earl Cash, a death row inmate who wakes up after what was supposed to be his execution. Instead, he's been thrown into a nightmarish game of survival, orchestrated by a sadistic snuff film director named Lionel Starkweather. The deal is simple: kill or be killed. Now, Cash isn't exactly a deeply written protagonist. He barely speaks, and there's not much to his character on the surface. But that's kind of the point. The game isn't about Cash as a person. It's about what the player is willing to do when pushed to the edge. At the start, he's just trying to stay alive, but as the game progresses, Cash becomes something else, something monstrous. By the final act, he's not just killing because he has to, he's killing because he's good at it. What Manhunt does brilliantly is its atmosphere and moral ambiguity. This game feels dirty, like you're doing something you shouldn't be doing. The way Starkweather taunts you, the grainy VHS-style visuals, the sound design, it all makes the player feel complicit in something truly sick. The writing leans into this in a way few games have ever dared. And Starkweather? He's one of Rockstar's most underrated villains. He's not a crime lord or a corrupt politician. He's just a man with a camera and no conscience. He doesn't care about Cash's survival, he just wants good footage. As effective as Manhunt is, the biggest issue with its story is that Cash is kind of nothing. The game does a great job of showing his transformation into a stone-cold killer, but it never really questions it. There's no real internal struggle, no moment where Cash reflects on what he's becoming. He just adapts and keeps going. That makes him feel more like a player avatar than an actual character. Even when Cash finally gets his revenge on Starkweather, there's no deeper meaning, no exploration of whether he's lost his humanity. The game just ends. C tier. This was Rockstar's first attempt at a Western, except instead of a sprawling open world, it was a linear third-person shooter. And let's be real, it's rough around the edges. You play as Red Harlow, a bounty hunter with the most generic Western backstory imaginable. His parents were murdered when he was a kid, and now he's out for revenge. That's it. That's the story. It's as cliche as it gets, but you know what? It works. Red doesn't talk much. He's stoic, he's brooding, and he doesn't have time for nonsense. He's basically a Clint Eastwood character in video game form, except with a comically oversized revolver that makes every shootout feel intense. As Red hunts down the men responsible for his family's murder, the game throws in a colorful cast of weirdos, from corrupt sheriffs to circus freaks with actual bear claws. It's less gritty Western and more spaghetti Western fever dream, which makes sense since the game was originally Capcom's project before Rockstar took over. However, the game does do a decent job of showing how Red evolves from a lone gunman into a full-blown legend. He starts as a simple bounty hunter, just taking jobs and making money, but as the game progresses, it becomes personal. You can feel his rage every time he takes down another man from his past, and honestly, that does make Red compelling, even if he's not the most complex character. Here's the problem though. Red Dead Revolver doesn't really develop its characters beyond their surface-level traits. Red is angry and wants revenge. And that's it. There's no inner conflict, no deeper layers to his character. Compare that to Red Dead Redemption, where John Marston constantly questions his past, his choices, and whether redemption is even possible. Red doesn't do that, he just shoots his way through every problem. And while the villains are fun, they're cartoonish at times.
Your judgment day has come.
This isn't No Country for Old Men, it's more like a comic book western, which is fine, but it does mean that Red Dead Revolver lacks the emotional weight of later Rockstar games. C tier. In 2004 came Grand Theft Auto San Andreas, and oh my god, it truly was revolutionary. A full state to explore, RPG mechanics, a story packed with betrayals, corrupt cops, and gang wars. It was insane. But what really makes San Andreas stand the test of time? Carl C.J. Johnson. Unlike most GTA protagonists before him, CJ felt real. He wasn't some hardened criminal from the start. He was just a guy thrown into chaos. CJ returns to Los Santos after 5 years away, only to find his mother murdered, his gang, Grove Street families, in shambles, and his former friends struggling to survive. From the jump, San Andreas makes it clear, this isn't just a power fantasy. CJ isn't some unstoppable crime boss. He's a kid who ran away only to get dragged back in. And unlike most GTA protagonists, CJ actually grows. At the start, he's loyal to his friends and family, but he's naive. He trusts the wrong people, he gets manipulated by corrupt cops, and he spends the first half of the game reacting instead of acting. But as the story goes on, CJ changes. He stops being a pawn and starts making his own moves, expanding into new cities, building an empire, and taking revenge on the people who betrayed him. First off, CJ is one of the most well-rounded characters in GTA history. He's not just some silent killer. He's charismatic, funny, and actually really likable. He cares about his friends, he values family, and he questions the madness around him. When corrupt cops use him, when his best friends betray him, when he's forced to commit crimes just to survive, you feel his frustration. Rockstar also nailed the supporting cast. Tenpenny, voiced by Samuel L. Jackson, is one of the best villains in gaming, a sadistic cop who treats CJ like a toy. Even minor characters like OG Locke are hilariously memorable. San Andreas was truly ahead of its time. However, things like the pacing could have been touched upon. The story is long, and the middle section when CJ gets exiled from Los Santos drags. The game builds up gang warfare and revenge early on, only to throw CJ into completely different storylines in San Fierro and Las Venturas. Ryder could have been a great secondary villain, but his betrayal is underexplored. He kinda just dies. But despite this, San Andreas is a masterpiece, and CJ's one of the best written protagonists in Rockstar's history. S tier. In 2006, Rockstar took a break from crime-ridden cities and gritty revenge tales to drop Bully. Instead of playing a hardened criminal, you played Jimmy Hopkins, a troubled 15-year-old dumped at Bulworth Academy, a school where the teachers are corrupt, the students are violent, and everyone is out for themselves. At first glance, Bully seems lighthearted, but make no mistake, this game has depth. It wasn't just about causing chaos, it was a brilliantly written satire on school life, social hierarchies, and authority figures who absolutely should not have power. Jimmy starts off as a classic Rockstar protagonist, a tough kid with a chip on his shoulder. He's been expelled from multiple schools, he doesn't trust anyone, and he's constantly on the defensive. But unlike most Rockstar leads, Jimmy isn't a bad guy. He doesn't want to hurt people, he just wants to survive Bulworth. And Bully does something genius, it makes you fight the system. Instead of taking over a city, you're taking over a school. Climbing the social ladders, you take down cliques. The bullies, the nerds, the preps, the greasers, the jocks, each with their own quirks and rivalries. By the end, Jimmy goes from a reckless, hot-headed kid to someone who actually cares about the people around him. He stands up for the weak, fights back against corrupt teachers, and earns the respect of the school. Rockstar nailed the school setting. Bulworth feels alive. Students have routines, teachers are cartoonishly awful, and every clique has its own personalities and conflicts. The game's humor? On point. It satirizes everything. Rich kids, authority figures, even the idea of troubled youth. And Jimmy? One of Rockstar's most unique protagonists. He's not a hero or a villain. He's just a kid trying to get by. Unlike GTA protagonists, he doesn't want power. He just wants a place where he's not being messed with. However, Jimmy's morality can sometimes feel inconsistent. Sometimes he's standing up for the weak, other times he's happily throwing kids in lockers. The game doesn't fully commit to whether Jimmy is good, bad, or just neutral. The ending also just feels a bit rushed. The final showdown with Gary is great, but after everything Jimmy goes through, he just shrugs and goes back to school. A little more reflection on his growth would have hit harder. Jimmy Hopkins may not be the deepest character in Rockstar's history, but he's one of the most relatable. B tier. Rockstar went even darker, more brutal, and more psychologically twisted, so much so that it was outright banned or heavily censored in multiple countries. But beyond the shock factor, Manhunt 2 introduced one of Rockstar's most unsettling protagonists, Daniel Lamb. Daniel wakes up in the middle of an asylum break with no memory of who he is or how he got there. The only thing guiding him? A mysterious voice in his head, Leo Casper. From the jump, Manhunt 2 throws you into a psychological nightmare. Daniel isn't some sadistic killer by choice. He's a product of government experiments gone wrong, a victim of Project Pikmin, a shadowy organization that brainwashed and weaponized people like him. He wasn't always a monster, he was a scientist, a husband, someone with a normal life, until it was stolen from him. What makes Daniel such a decent protagonist is how much we see him struggle. He constantly questions himself, his past, and whether he even deserves to live. While Manhunt 2 takes its story deeper than the first game, it also loses some of its impact because of one key issue: the execution. The first half of the game is a masterclass in psychological horror. You're confused, desperate, and constantly on edge. But once the story starts revealing its secrets, it loses some of its mystery. The ending, where you choose whether Daniel or Leo wins, feels a little rushed and doesn't carry the same weight as the mind-breaking build-up before it. C tier. Rockstar hit the reset button with Grand Theft Auto 4, taking the series in a grittier, more realistic direction. It traded in jetpacks and gang wars for a cold, cynical story about the American dream, crime, and consequences. Rockstar absolutely nailed Nico's character writing. Unlike previous protagonists, Nico wasn't just some up-and-coming gangster looking for power. He was a deeply broken man with a haunted past. A former soldier from Eastern Europe, he arrives in Liberty City chasing the dream his cousin Roman sold him: wealth, luxury, and a fresh start. But that dream is a lie. Instead of paradise, he finds himself drowning in the same violence and corruption he tried to escape. Nico is arguably the most human GTA protagonist to date. He's funny, sarcastic, and even charming, but there's this constant sadness underneath. He's haunted by his past in the war, the people he's killed, and the betrayal that still eats at him. Every decision he makes is driven by that past, whether he's trying to find revenge or just survive in this brutal new world. And Rockstar really leaned into this. Liberty City isn't just a backdrop, it's a reflection of Nico himself. It's cold, cynical, and unforgiving. Every character he meets, from crime lords to corrupt politicians, reinforces the idea that the American dream is rigged. However, for all the praise GTA 4 gets, there's one area where the writing contradicts itself: Nico's morality. Throughout the story, he constantly talks about wanting to leave violence behind. He tells Roman he wants a normal life, he vents to his friends about his regrets, and he seems disgusted by senseless killing. But then you, the player, are mowing down entire streets of cops and gangsters in the next mission. This creates a bit of narrative dissonance. Nico is written like a character who's tired of killing, but the game forces him to do it anyway, over and over again. Another weak spot is the choice system. The game presents moral decisions like sparing or killing certain characters, but they rarely have any major impact on the story. GTA 4's choices mostly feel like an illusion of choice rather than something meaningful. But in saying that, I still gotta give it S tier. First off, John Marston is one of the most complex protagonists Rockstar has ever written. He's not a silent killer like James Earl Cash, or a power-hungry criminal like Tommy Vercetti. He's a man running from his past, desperately trying to be better. When we meet John, he's already left his outlaw days behind. He's got a wife, a son, and a ranch, and all he wants is a simple, peaceful life. But the government has other plans. Federal agents kidnap his family and force him to hunt down the last remaining members of his old gang, the same men who once saved his life, rode alongside him, and shaped him into the man he is today. This setup is brilliant because it makes the story personal. John isn't trying to take over the Wild West, he's trying to bury it. But as much as he tries to walk the path of redemption, the world won't let him. One of the best things about John is his authenticity. He's not a hero, he's done horrible things. But he's also not a monster. He has honor, he has regrets, and above all, he loves his family. He's caught between two worlds, his past as a killer and his future as a father. The way Rockstar grounds him in realism is what makes him so compelling. He's not overly dramatic or philosophical, he's just a man trying to do right. His humor, his frustration, his sarcasm, it all makes him feel real. For as great as John Marston is, however, Red Dead Redemption does have flaws in how it develops him. The opening is strong and the ending is unforgettable, but the middle, it meanders. Once John gets to Mexico, the game slows down, with too many repetitive missions and underdeveloped side characters. The story loses focus on John's emotional journey and instead leans into generic help these strangers side quests. John also talks a lot about wanting to change, but we rarely see him struggle with that change. Unlike Red Dead Redemption 2, where Arthur Morgan constantly questions his morality, John is already set in his beliefs. This makes him feel less dynamic. He's a great character, but there's not much growth. But let's be real, the reason Red Dead Redemption is legendary isn't just because of John Marston's character, it's because of how his story ends. After spending the entire game trying to do right, John finally gets his family back. He's free, he's at peace, and then the government betrays him. They don't let outlaws retire. They don't let men like John walk away. The moment those agents show up at his ranch, you know what's coming, but that doesn't make it any easier. That final shootout is one of the most devastating moments in gaming. John knows he's doomed. He knows Abigail and Jack will never be safe if he fights back. So he does the only thing he can. S tier. Released in 2011, LA Noire was Rockstar's boldest experiment yet. Instead of another open-world crime spree, they gave us a neo-noir detective thriller, complete with motion-captured performances, tense interrogations, and a protagonist that wasn't a criminal for once. From the very start, Cole Phelps is different from Rockstar's usual leads. He's not a gangster, not an outlaw, not a hitman. He's a man who believes in law and order. But here's what makes him interesting. His righteousness isn't just a personality trait, it's a flaw. Cole Phelps is a man obsessed with doing things by the book. He sees himself as above corruption, better than his fellow officers, a man who fights for truth and justice. And at first, it seems like he's right. He moves up from beat cop to traffic detective, then to homicide, vice, and arson, solving high-profile cases with a sharp mind and even sharper instincts. But as the game progresses, we start to see the cracks. Cole isn't as pure as he thinks he is. His arrogance makes him blind to his own hypocrisy. He judges others for their mistakes but refuses to confront his own. He believes he's a hero, but in reality, he's just as flawed as the criminals he arrests. In saying that, I wish his backstory was explored a bit more. We get glimpses of Cole's past in World War II flashbacks, showing his time as a lieutenant in the Marines. We learn that his leadership got men killed, that his squad hated him, and that he was desperate to be seen as a hero. But these moments are too fragmented. They build tension but don't fully explore how the war shaped him. If we got more direct insight into his guilt, his trauma, and his need for redemption, his character would feel even more fleshed out. Not to mention the player never fully connects with him. Unlike John Marston or Nico Bellic, Cole Phelps is hard to empathize with. He's cold, distant, and rarely shows emotion. The game never lets you see his personal life, so when he loses everything, it's hard to feel the full weight of it. If we had more scenes of him with his wife, his kids, or even just struggling with his emotions outside of work, he would have felt more human. But despite its flaws, LA Noire still delivers one of the best endings in a Rockstar game. After his career is destroyed, Cole is given one last shot at redemption. He teams up with disgraced detective Jack Kelso, uncovering a massive conspiracy that links the LAPD, the mob, and the US government. For the first time, Cole isn't chasing a promotion, he's chasing the truth, and it costs him everything. In the final moments, Cole sacrifices himself, drowning in the sewers beneath Los Angeles, while the corrupt men he exposed walk away free. Cole Phelps isn't Rockstar's most likable protagonist, but he's one of their most fascinating. He's a man who wants to do good, but his own flaws drag him down. B tier. Max Payne has always been the embodiment of the tragic hero. In Max Payne 1 and 2, we witnessed his descent into madness, the pain from his family's murder, and the sense of futile vengeance that defined his character. By Max Payne 3, the weight of his grief and guilt is even more crushing. Max is a man drowning in guilt and regret. He's the classic man out of place, someone who was once a sharp, confident NYPD detective, but is now a drunken, self-loathing, and bitter ex-cop. The game delves into Max's depression, his alcoholism, and his struggle to make sense of his past. Max isn't a typical action hero. He's a deeply flawed man trying to outrun his demons. This complexity makes him one of Rockstar's most emotionally engaging characters. Max isn't fighting against a physical enemy as much as he's fighting against himself. His past is filled with decades of failure, loss, and mistakes. Every decision he makes in Max Payne 3 feels like it's an attempt to find redemption, to right the wrongs of his previous life. This makes him feel real and grounded, something rare in action games. His constant inner monologue filled with cynicism and bitterness paints him as a deeply complex character who doesn't want to change but feels like he has no other choice. Max Payne's dialogue is still some of the best noir-inspired writing in video games. His quippy, sarcastic, and often melancholy remarks are woven with dark humor. He's a walking contradiction, sarcastic, yet sincere, brutal, yet vulnerable. His internal struggle, along with the poetic tone of his narration, adds a layer of philosophical depth to the game. The character's writing is smart, but it's also tragic, leaving players to sympathize with a man who can never quite get it together. However, Max's character arc in Max Payne 3 is strong in theory, but when it comes to his actual development, the story feels somewhat stagnant. Despite all the turmoil, the trauma, and the action, Max remains a broken, tragic figure by the end of the game, with very little personal growth. In comparison to other Rockstar protagonists like John Marston or Nico Bellic, Max doesn't learn or evolve as much. The game ends with him still drowning in alcohol, still filled with regret, and still desperately trying to make sense of his life. While this fits the character, the lack of hope for redemption makes his journey feel somewhat unresolved. Ultimately, Max doesn't get the redemption he so desperately wanted. The story's conclusion is a brutal reflection of his inability to escape his past. It's both his greatest tragedy and the thing that makes him so compelling. A tier. Okay, GTA 5 is a hard one. The game didn't just focus on one protagonist, but instead allowed players to control 3 unique characters. This innovation allowed for diverse storylines, personalities, and approaches to the chaos that GTA is famous for. Each of the 3 protagonists, Michael DeSanta, Trevor Phillips, and Franklin Clinton, offered their own distinct perspectives and experiences. Michael's internal conflict, his desire to escape the criminal life, but his inability to truly leave it behind, makes him one of the most relatable protagonists in GTA 5. He represents the disillusionment of people who, despite achieving wealth and success, find themselves stuck in emotional and moral stagnation. His character arc is well executed. He may seem like an arrogant, spoiled, middle-aged man, but his inner turmoil and the dynamic with his family give him a layer of depth. He genuinely wants to be a better father and husband, but his criminal nature always seems to pull him back. Michael's relationship with his family, especially with his wife Amanda and son Jimmy, is a standout part of his character. There's a sense of tragic irony in how he tries to protect them, but also inadvertently perpetuates the cycle of dysfunction. However, while Michael's character is great, his development is somewhat shallow in comparison to the other 2 protagonists. His life of crime and desire to escape it could have been explored more deeply, but ultimately he doesn't experience a transformative journey. His arc lacks a real sense of redemption. While he tries to reconcile his actions, it never feels like he truly achieves it. His relationship with Trevor is the closest thing to a redemption, but even that is rooted in betrayal and ego. B tier. Trevor, however, is the wild card of the game, and that unpredictability is what makes him so fascinating. He's completely unhinged, and that unpredictability keeps the player on edge. One moment he's calm and charming, the next he's in a rage, ready to blow up anything in sight. Despite his insanity, Trevor is one of the most emotionally complex characters in the game. His relationship with Michael is one of deep betrayal and love, and his desire for validation and recognition adds layers to his violent persona. He's not just a crazy man, he's a hurt man trying to find a place in the world, making him tragically sympathetic at times. However, Trevor's extreme, erratic behavior can sometimes make him seem one-dimensional. He's so outrageous and over the top that it can be hard to take him seriously at times. While Trevor's chaos is fun to experience, he lacks the kind of moral compass that would allow him to grow as a person. His relationship with Michael is the closest thing to a meaningful bond, but Trevor's complete lack of empathy for others holds him back from ever achieving redemption. A tier. Franklin Clinton, the 3rd protagonist, represents the new generation in Grand Theft Auto 5. Unlike Michael, who's a retired criminal, or Trevor, who's lost all sense of morality, Franklin is still trying to make a name for himself in a world that's constantly pulling him down. He's an ambitious character who seeks something greater than his circumstances. Franklin's arc is one of the few where you genuinely see him evolve as a person. He starts as a small-time hustler, but by the end of the game, he's forced to confront the consequences of his choices, which pushes him toward a more mature outlook. His journey from a naive young man to someone who realizes the weight of his choices is satisfying and believable. But while Franklin's own journey is interesting, his relationships with Michael and Trevor don't feel as deeply developed as they could be. The game often focuses on his struggles with his past and his future, but his connection with the other characters doesn't feel as emotionally rich. While Franklin's arc is one of growth, there are times when his moral compass seems a bit inconsistent. He's torn between loyalty to Michael and his desire to live an honest life, but the writing sometimes pushes him in directions that don't feel as genuine. A tier. Also, before you start sending hate, I was edging putting Michael in A tier as well, but I think Franklin and Trevor are just that slight bit stronger of characters, so I'll give them an edging A.
What the fuck?
Wow. Just wow. This is without a doubt the greatest character ever written by Rockstar. Arthur Morgan's story begins in the Dutch Vanderlinde gang, where he was taken in as a child after being abandoned by his father. He's essentially Dutch's right-hand man, a loyal enforcer and someone who has been shaped by the gang's philosophy. Raised on violence, betrayal, and the harsh realities of the outlaw life, Arthur's character is molded by his relationship with Dutch, his loyalty to the gang, and his struggle to reconcile his morality with the brutal world he lives in. One of the things that make Arthur such a compelling character is how strong and capable he is, yet deeply vulnerable. Early on, he's introduced as a hardened, cynical man who's been through a lot, someone who's seen the worst humanity has to offer. But as the game progresses, we begin to peel back the layers of Arthur's personality, revealing a man who is far more complicated and empathetic than he initially appears. What makes Arthur stand out is his internal conflict. He's a man of many contradictions. He's tough, yet he's also kind-hearted. He's loyal to Dutch and the gang, but he increasingly questions their actions. He's a man living in a time where his values clash with the inevitable decay of his world, and he struggles with whether he should continue down the outlaw path or try to find some semblance of redemption. Throughout the game, Arthur's relationship with others is explored in remarkable depth, whether it's his brotherly bond with John Marston, his moments of camaraderie with Sadie Adler, or his connection with younger members like Jack. Arthur is shown to have a heart that beats for those he cares about. He's a man with a deep sense of loyalty and genuine care for the people around him. The emotional payoff in Arthur's relationships, especially near the end of his arc, is nothing short of brilliant. Arthur's arc is one of the most emotionally charged and beautifully written character journeys in gaming history. The central theme of RDR2 is redemption, and Arthur's arc is a masterclass in this concept. As the game progresses, Arthur starts realizing the destructive path that Dutch's gang is on, and by the latter half of the game, he begins questioning his own role in that chaos. This internal conflict is one of the most moving aspects of the narrative. Arthur's moral compass shifts, and as he faces his own mortality, he becomes determined to do what he can to leave the world a little better than he found it, especially for those he loves. The genius of Arthur's story lies in the way his internal conflict is handled. At first, he believes in Dutch's ideals, liberty, freedom, and fighting for the underdog, but as Dutch's actions grow more erratic and violent, Arthur starts to see the cracks in that vision. The shift is gradual, and it feels incredibly earned. The writing team didn't rush this transformation. They gave us the time to watch Arthur evolve, reflect, and come to his own conclusions. This kind of slow burn character development is incredibly rare in video games, and it's executed beautifully here. The game's central focus on relationships is one of the best aspects of the writing. Arthur's evolution isn't just driven by grand philosophical realizations, but by his connections with others. Whether it's with John, Sadie, or even characters like Mary Beth and Tilly, his growth is deeply intertwined with his relationships. By the time the game reaches its emotional climax, it's clear that Arthur has transformed not only through his own experiences, but because of the people he's come to care for. Arthur is not simply a bad guy turned good. His character arc is about shades of gray, not absolutes. His actions are driven by self-interest, but he never loses his humanity. There are moments when he does horrific things, but these moments are always balanced by his self-awareness and attempts to make amends. This moral ambiguity adds incredible weight to his character. His decision to help John escape, knowing that he may not survive to see the fruits of his labor, is a heartbreaking and selfless act of redemption. His final ride, filled with courage, regret, and acceptance, is one of the most impactful moments in gaming. And I mean, if you can make an entire player base mad to play as John Marston after Arthur's death, there is nowhere to put Arthur besides something higher than S tier. So I give him an S tier with a thumbs up. As for the smaller Rockstar titles, here are my rankings. An energetic lead in an innovative top-down GTA experience, but his characterization is limited by the game's format. C tier. A solid, streetwise character whose story feels serviceable but doesn't reach the narrative depth of later GTA heroes. C tier. Displays ambition and grit in a vibrant setting, yet his personal journey isn't explored as fully as in Rockstar's bigger narratives. C tier. A compelling look into biker gang life with moments of genuine depth, though his arc is somewhat eclipsed by GTA 4's main story. B tier. Charismatic and dynamic, Luis offers a fresh, energetic perspective that balances GTA 4's darker tone with engaging flair. B tier. No distinct lead. D tier. A generic, top-down avatar with little personality or backstory. F tier. I think we know what I'm about to say. A perfect F tier. Anyway, that's all of Rockstar's Protagonist ranked. Plenty more videos like this coming, so subscribe.